This is the Brave New Coin Crypto Conversation, hosted by Andy Pickering.
Hi everyone, Andy Pickering here. I'm your host and welcome to the Crypto Conversation, a Brave New Coin podcast where we talk to the people building the future in the Bitcoin, blockchain, and cryptocurrency space. Today's podcast is brought to you by Leverage, a new fully featured decentralized futures exchange without compromise. Leverage is a DEX, so you can trade with your keys and sign orders with just one click. And Leverage is fast. Yes, indeed. Leverage is powered by Gluon, a layer 2 solution with the scalability and speed of a centralized exchange and the super low fees of a DEX. That's right, Leverage combines the best features of CeFi and DeFi so you can trade crypto spot and derivatives with up to 100x leverage while maintaining control of your assets at all times. And this month, Leverage are running a trading competition with a $25,000 grand prize that goes to the account that gets the largest dollar value increase over that period. And there's lots of smaller prizes too. Want in? Of course you do. If that's you, go to leverage.io for all of the details. And of course, Leverage is spelled Leverj.io and trade the future of crypto today. And now it's on with the show.
Yeah, boy!
Hi everyone, Andy Pickering here. Got something a little bit different for you today. I have a very special chat with Sergey Nazarov from Chainlink. This is actually a recording of a fireside chat that I hosted with Sergey at the Blockdown 4.0 virtual conference. So yeah, we're republishing it here as a podcast, and it's pretty exciting. As you'll learn, or as you probably even are already aware, Chainlink have just released a new white paper called Chainlink 2.0, the next steps in the evolution of decentralized Oracle networks, and that is what Sergey and I are here to discuss. So let's get right on into it. Welcome everyone. Here we are at the Blockdown 4.0 virtual conference. My name is Andy Pickering, and I host the Crypto Conversation podcast for Brave New Coin. Now, today I'm joined by Sergey Nazarov. Sergey, of course, is the co-founder of Chainlink, the decentralized Oracle network. Now, yesterday was a very exciting day for Sergey and the Chainlink team because Chainlink have released their second white paper. Now, this new white paper represents a full year of work. It's over 100 pages long, and it was written by Dr. R.A. Jules, Sergey, and a dozen other academic researchers from across the computer science field. The white paper is called Chainlink 2.0, Next Steps in the Evolution of Decentralized Oracle Networks. Now, the white paper, it explains how these Oracle networks will go on to create a decentralized metalayer that enhances smart contracts with highly scalable, confidential, and secure forms of off-chain computation, in addition to the external data feeds that Chainlink powers today. Now, this is all very exciting stuff, and we're here to dig into it all today. Hello and welcome, Sergey.
Andy, good to see you again. Thanks for having me.
It's good to see you as well, Sergey. I think just to begin with, maybe just to set the scene and set some context, would love you to maybe just begin by talking a little bit about your background and why you first began to get involved with blockchains and the promise of smart contracts and what you could build there.
I think there were a number of things that attracted me. I think initially the relationship with digital currency was very powerful because I knew something about the digital currency industry. And when I realized that Bitcoin wasn't a company, but what it was an kind of unstoppable protocol that operated in a way that didn't require an entity to exist, I knew that was very unique. And then as I began to scratch below the surface, I discovered things like multi-signature and any number of other kind of guarantees and properties of Bitcoin. And some of the ideas behind these systems, where I started to understand that the guarantees of these systems were rooted in mathematics and not in a brand, right? And I really think that that's the big difference between our industry and applications built on a blockchain and in a smart contract form, rather than all the applications out there in the world that really rely on a logo, right? They rely on somebody to believe in a brand, and for us to put that faith in a brand, which allows it to do business with us or control our information or hold our assets or allow us or not allow us to trade our assets or have insurance or whatever the trust relationship is. And I knew, from my previous time, kind of working with various agreements and working just with different companies, that brands have a lot more control over contracts and outcomes than people thought, right? Everybody thinks they have one relationship with a brand and their assets and their insurance product and maybe their own data. And really the relationship that people have to their own data, their own assets, and insurance agreement, it's very different than what they think it is. And that always kind of seemed very strange to me, right? Because it basically meant that the legal framework doesn't work in a way that forces a certain amount of clarity or that forces a certain amount of accountability or deterministic guarantees or relationships between users and brands and contracts and so on. And so when I really understood what blockchains do, I started looking for what else you could do with them. And at first we put message data on a blockchain. We put just communications data. And then we started looking at decentralized exchanges and how you could do things with trading data and ownership data. But I quickly arrived at a conclusion that the same guarantees that blockchains could give to ownership data or communication related data or ownership and trading data, trading of that ownership, it could really give to all other contracts. I basically came to the realization, along with a number of other people at that time, that you can really have smart contracts become the dominant form of digital agreement to define the relationship between people and people, people and institutions, institutions and institutions, for pretty much everything that you could codify into this smart contract format and about which you could prove things, right? So there were always two properties of a smart contract for me. There was the codification of the contractual conditions, and then there was the proving of the contractual outcomes. And when I began working on smart contracts over 7 years ago, while tokens were a part of the system, and while they were part of different systems even then, I thought that was just one use case. That was tokens and private key voting were just one of many, many use cases for smart contracts. And even from the beginning, I always viewed smart contracts as what we're now calling hybrid smart contracts, in that, in my mind, a smart contract always combined a codified agreement in a highly tamper-proof, reliable form on a blockchain with a system that proved something about what happened, right? So there needed to be a system that would prove to the contract that goods had arrived, or a market price had changed, or an ad was served, or goods were sent, or a trade was done, or whatever it was, right? And I pretty quickly came to the realization that without a system to prove things to smart contracts that are codified on a blockchain, those smart contracts would be kind of left to the use cases of tokenization and private key voting, which are both unbelievably useful use cases, right? Tokenization gets a lot of value into our ecosystem, and private key and token-based voting allows for governance structures to appear around that value. And so that all makes perfect sense. But my conception, and the thing that really got me into the blockchain industry, was this conception of a smart contract, in that it was smart enough to discern and prove what had happened. And I quickly realized that you need an oracle for that, right? You need something called an oracle mechanism. And at first we had a centralized oracle mechanism. And then after many years, we worked on how to decentralize it. And then eventually we arrived at what Chainlink is, with an oracle mechanism that can provide certain decentralized guarantees. And those decentralized guarantees and tamper-proofness guarantees are very important, because just like the contract that's codified is tamper-proof, the guarantees about what happened, which essentially controls that codified agreement in the form of a smart contract on chain, that proof and that trigger and those set of events or computations need to also meet this very high standard. And that's kind of the body of work that I've been involved in. and that we have a large and growing community of people collaborating on with us. To that point, I really just want to say that I'm unbelievably grateful and kind of even privileged to have worked on this white paper with some of the co-authors we have, and I'm also very grateful for the community that we have and their continued support of us and their continued interest in what we're doing. And I really feel that there is a core part of our community, and even the newer members of our community, that have always conceptualized smart contracts in the way that I conceptualized them and I understood them as far back as 7 or 8 years ago, in this mechanism that isn't just about tokens, but it's about a contract that can become the dominant form of digital agreement and that can go on to kind of define how all of these industries operate. And I think that's the exciting kind of goal that we all share, both in terms of the white paper collaborators and in terms of all the amazing people building Chainlink and the people contributing to building it properly, all the way to our various community members that I think also want to see this change in the world, that I think we're all a part of making happen together.
Very nice, Sergey. So, look, I want to dig into a term that you used there, and it's also used in this new white paper. So you talked about hybrid smart contracts, right? And as I understand it, this goes beyond the capabilities of smart contracts today. So I'd love it if you could perhaps really dig in and define for us what you mean by a hybrid smart contract, how that goes beyond the capabilities of smart contracts today, and how this will come to redefine the blockchain industry.
Sure, of course. I think the way to think about a hybrid smart contract is really the initial conception that that I and some of the people that I worked with and some of the people in the blockchain industry as far back as 7 or 8 years ago, where there was always this assumption that a smart contract would know that something happened. It would have proof, and it would be able to interact with all the world's systems in a meaningful, kind of valuable real world outcome type of way. Since then, a smart contract has really begun to be defined as the code that is run on a blockchain, right? So if there's some kind of code running in a blockchain or a smart contract platform like Ethereum, that's what a smart contract is considered. And therefore, a smart contract just in and of itself has gone on to mean the code running on a blockchain, which due to the nature of blockchains has really come to mean a piece of code that can define conditions, but it can't know whether those conditions have been met unless those conditions are about token generation events, token movement events, or private key signatures or token-based voting type of schemes. And I think what a hybrid smart contract is, the reason that we've gone with that term in the white paper is we're trying to define that conception of a smart contract that's more holistic in terms of what it enables people to do and to build. And it's considered a hybrid smart contract, and a hybrid in the sense that it is a combination of the on-chain code and the on-chain agreement that's codified in a smart contract platform, and all of the off-chain systems that are related to that code operating properly, right? Because at the end of the day, if you look at certain hybrid smart contracts, like the majority of DeFi, so for example, the majority of DeFi is a hybrid smart contract as far as it uses a piece of data or it needs an input from a system that is not part of a blockchain, right? So you may have lending protocols and derivatives protocols that are unbelievably well made, really elegant as separate services that can even interoperate. They can be very well audited. But at the end of the day, for them to come into existence and operate, they need a connection to the external world. And they need that connection to be more and more advanced because the markets that they're about are more and more advanced. The data they need is more and more advanced. And some of the calculations that they need are more and more advanced to the degree that they don't want to put them on chain. They might want those calculations, often related to the data they're relying on, to happen in a kind of surrogate system that makes up this hybrid smart contract, right? So the hybrid smart contract is basically a term to encapsulate all of the on-chain code as well as all of the off-chain systems that control and are controlled by that code. And so that's the more holistic vision of a hybrid smart contract. I think hybrid smart contracts are already redefining our industry. I think you can see this in the form of DeFi. I think you can see this in the form of decentralized insurance in terms of certain gaming contracts that guarantee outcomes to users, right? And really what you see is you see the same pattern again and again, right? You see decentralized financial products, decentralized insurance, decentralized gaming products. But really, when you look under the hood and you look at the architecture of these financial products and these gaming products and global trade products, you'll see that they are equally made up of two parts. They're made up of a hybrid of the on-chain code that defines the conditions of the contract, and then a collection of off-chain systems that trigger the contract, prove things to the contract, or sometimes take actions on behalf of the contract and return proof that an action was taken back to it. And so, in the case of DeFi, that's often market data going to a contract to settle or to do lending payments. To the gaming industry, it's often lotteries, right? So you have a lottery where you define the conditions of the game, but then the random number generator is off chain, and the random number generator has to provide a provably random input into the lottery contract for the lottery to decide who wins. For global trade, it's the location of goods, it's the status of goods on certain supply chain systems. For insurance, it's things like weather data and calculating that weather data in complicated ways to validate it, to make sure that the weather data is triggering the contract correctly. And so I think that you really do see a lot of hybrid smart contracts already redefining what blockchains are being used for. They're just not called hybrid smart contracts. They're called smart contracts because the core primary conditions of the agreement are on chain. But the way that we conceptualize this architecture and this way of building contracts in the white paper, it's a hybrid because the contract is really defined by much more in those cases. It's defined by both the on-chain code and the security and provability and reliability of the off-chain systems that are controlling and taking action on behalf of the hybrid smart contract.
Okay, well, let's stay with the white paper, Sergey. But you mentioned DeFi, and I think a lot of people are watching this will be very familiar with DeFi, and they will be DeFi participants, and they will be very keen to know. I mentioned in the intro that the white paper is 100 pages long, so there's a lot of work, there's a lot of technical advancement that is being made here. So look, let's talk about that. Can you give us some sense of what the technical advancements that you've outlined in the white paper, what do they mean for the future of the DeFi ecosystem and perhaps even, the future adoption of DeFi?
Sure, absolutely. I think when you look at decentralized financial products under the hood and you see how they're actually built, what you're going to see is a services-oriented architecture of a lot of separate, smaller contracts interoperating with each other. And some of those contracts will be other protocols that do calculations, provide access to certain financial markets, provide liquidity, provide features that other protocols don't have. And that's a big part of the power of DeFi, is that there's this amazing open source movement and amazing community of unbelievably smart people building these individual services that provide their own value and that can then interoperate to provide huge amounts of aggregate value, which in my opinion is already surpassing the global financial system's ability to provide value from the point of view of financial products. One category of the services, one category of the contracts that you will see on chain under the hood defining these financial products will be contracts that represent off-chain systems. So what an oracle really is, or an oracle network in a decentralized form of an oracle, is an off-chain collection of services and systems and connections that is made secure and decentralized through some method of consensus. And it's also an on-chain contract that other contracts can go to for a certain input or a certain event out in the real world or a certain type of calculation, and often a combination of all three of those, right? And so if you look at building decentralized financial product through this lens, which is, by the way that all web infrastructure and web systems are built, the reason that relatively small teams of people can build such amazing Web 2.0 systems and applications is because they have a collection of thousands, if not millions, of different services that allow them to send text messages, to get GPS data, to make payments to people, to get market data, to get weather data. And this is second nature in the Web 2.0 world. Unfortunately, at this point in the Web 3.0 world, in the blockchain world where DeFi applications are being built, you don't necessarily have that large array of services. And we are Chainlink and Chainlink Oracle Networks are actually the largest provider of these various services that connect people to off-chain systems and provide all this various data, which then goes on to be used for building various smart contracts. At this point, Chainlink is in the hundreds of Oracle networks kind of size, which means there are hundreds of different services, there are hundreds of different individual pieces of data, and that's the size of the services layer of the different pieces of data, the different events that people can make happen, the different outcomes that people can generate from a smart contract. Now, what the Chainlink 2.0 white paper describes is a way to scale from hundreds of decentralized Oracle networks to thousands. And then, in addition to scaling to thousands of decentralized Oracle networks, how do we make each of those Oracle networks able to do more for the smart contracts that rely on them to make their critical computations, right? The key idea of scaling is packaged in a number of different kind of off-chain computation calculations, a number of different scalability fixes, some of which have already been deployed and implemented. The dynamic to increase the usefulness of Oracle networks really comes down to their ability to do more advanced computation. So it comes down to somebody building a hybrid smart contract in a very efficient, secure way in these two equal parts of an on-chain contract that defines the primary conditions, holds the value, provides transparency about key state changes, and then an off-chain portion that is equally easy to build and provide conditions for, right? So what this means is that the configurability of decentralized Oracle networks in Chainlink is going to massively improve to the point that you have a choice about how much computation you want to put in a decentralized Oracle network versus how much you want to put in a smart contract. And I think there will be a certain type of computation that'll go into a smart contract. That computation will be about holding value. It'll be about proving certain transparent state changes that are important for people to know about. It will be about giving people certain voting rights and control rights over value. And it'll be about distributing value from that kind of single source of truth, golden record, that's then composable with all the other DeFi contracts. But then I also think, and we know this from our experience working with a lot of the top DeFi protocols, people want to build more advanced decentralized financial products, more advanced decentralized insurance products, more advanced games. They want to build things the way that they build them in the Web 2.0 world. And in our opinion, the only thing really limiting people from doing that is either the limitations of the chain that they're on, whatever those limitations might be, and the only other thing is their ability to access the services that they're used to accessing in the Web 2.0 world, right? So they're used to just saying, hey, I want this piece of data, and they get it with no problem. Or they're used to saying, hey, I want this piece of data, but I want you to do some kind of computation on it, and then I want you to give me that result because that's actually the result I need. And I'm going to define what that computation is for you here, you know, in this API or in this system over here. And I think that creating that same design pattern in the blockchain space and enabling developers in Web 3.0 land to build anything they want to build, regardless of the limitations of a blockchain, because they can now define the computations they want in addition to the blockchain on a decentralized Oracle network, assuming they're comfortable with its security, assuming they've composed an Oracle network that meets their decentralization requirements, assuming, you know, they have the ability, the Oracle network has the ability to get access to the data, which it does in pretty much almost all cases. You really arrive at a place where you have thousands of Oracle networks and you have thousands of services that people can gain access to. And in gaining access to these services in an efficient, secure way, I think the same thing that happened with DeFi is likely to happen again, because it's not really a coincidence that the amount of DeFi markets, applications, and kind of financial products has grown in a very heavy correlation with the amount of data and the amount of Oracle networks and the amount of different decentralized services that we're able to put on chain. And what we actually see is that the degree to which we're able to put more data, more decentralized services, whether that's randomness, whether that's weather data, whether it's market data, we suddenly see people getting the final building block of what's needed for them to basically launch their decentralized application. And so I think the real technical advancement here is around both the scaling of the Chainlink protocol and the creation of more decentralized Oracle networks into the thousands, and also increasing the robustness and the feature richness and the ability for those decentralized Oracle networks to aid a smart contract in literally any piece of data, any computation, any kind of additional trust minimized service or computation that the smart contract needs, whether that smart contract's running on a blockchain or a layer 2 or whatever environment the core agreement's code is operating in.
Very, very interesting, Sergey. Okay, well, look, so we've covered DeFi there. I also heard you mention Web 3.0, I think, which is where we're going. So there's this term that you used, and I love the term. It's a great term. It's in the white paper. So I think you describe Chainlink 2.0 as a decentralized meta layer, right? I think that's a great term. So can you explain what you mean by a decentralized meta layer? So I think this is maybe above DeFi. We're going a step out. What does this mean, and what are the implications for the future of the blockchain ecosystem?
Sure. The decentralized meta layer is really just the name we have in the white paper for this very large collection of decentralized Oracle networks. So once you arrive at a very large collection of different decentralized services that are provided on an individual basis by their own specific decentralized Oracle network providing its own service, whether that's about a specific piece of data or about a certain randomness computation, or about whatever the service that the decentralized Oracle network provides, I think you arrive at a kind of set of building blocks that can actually be clicked together in this decentralized meta layer to provide greater and greater functionality to smart contracts. And for example, right now, we already have certain users of the Chainlink network utilizing both the decentralized Oracle networks as a data source for price data, and they're also using it for proof of reserves, right? They're also using it to prove things about an asset and its current status through API queries about the asset's kind of custody provider and the status of the asset, right? I think we're already seeing this, even with the limited amount of services that Chainlink provides today. We're basically seeing people combine different decentralized Oracle networks as inputs and as outputs from a single smart contract. And I think really what they're going to be interacting with in this large combination of services is just going to be the decentralized meta layer. And the decentralized meta layer is going to enable this advanced orchestration between all the world's data, all the world's computations, and the smart contracts that define the contractual conditions of how the entire world operates. And I think that'll also extend to the need for enterprise systems to control contracts and interact with contracts in a scalable, highly reliable way. So I think the reason it's called the meta layer is because it basically sits between the blockchain world and smart contracts and all of the interactions that those smart contracts would need to have with the real world. And that includes connecting to an enterprise backend. It includes connecting to a data source. It includes sending a payment somewhere. It includes, verifying that something happened with a package. It includes all of those interactions. And each of them is going to be defined through this kind of singular service that's on chain, that's one of thousands and possibly eventually one of millions of services that I think, just like there are multiple APIs going into a Web 2.0 application, you're going to see multiple Oracles and Oracle networks utilized by a smart contract. And the more complicated and the more advanced and the more value generating the contract is through more advanced and complicated use cases, I think the more that the services in the decentralized meta layer will become critical to it properly operating. And the metalayer really has this initial goal of providing all these services, and then eventually it has a goal of you being able to define a hybrid smart contract within the decentralized metalayer, and then the decentralized metalayer should allow you to put the on-chain code you need into whatever blockchains you need. It could even be multiple blockchains. And then it should also allow you to interact with all the off-chain systems that you need to orchestrate activity around with all those contracts. And I think what we're going towards is contracts that are more advanced in how they interact with the real world. And so the orchestration of all that activity, in addition to the orchestration of activity across different chains that have different pieces of data for the contract, or different payment outcomes, or different custody outcomes from the contract, all of that needs to be orchestrated somewhere in addition to the contract code itself, right? So the contract code itself will continue to live on various blockchains, and it will continue to play this key critical role of composability, value transfer, transparency, some version of voting and governance. And then it will need to interact with other contracts and other chains. It will need to interact with data sources. It will need to interact with payment systems. And all of that in orchestration will happen in the decentralized metalayer under its own set of rules that are going to actually need to live in some cohesive way across different decentralized Oracle networks. And that's going to be the goal of the metalayer, is simplifying that orchestration across different contracts, across different chains, across different services to create these what I imagine will be very, very advanced, very, very complicated hybrid smart contracts that can prove their security, both from the point of view of the chains that they're on and from the point of view of the different services that they're relying on through the decentralized metalayer.
All right, well, there you have it, folks, the decentralized metalayer. Look, Sergey, when we've talked before, you've always talked about this idea that one of the things that you've liked about blockchains, and I think one of the goals of your work with Chainlink, is really that you want to reinvent the trust model of our current economic system. Really, it's about trying to make a more transparent, fairer world for anyone all over the world, really. So I'd love it again if we're zooming out again, so into more kind of philosophical realm, if you like. But so let's link it back to hybrid smart contracts and how you see these as, again, reinventing the trust model of the current economic system and just making a fairer, more transparent world for everyone.
Yeah, of course. I think that's very important. Once again, when I got into this industry, I conceptualized smart contracts initially as hybrid smart contracts. Smart contracts for me were not just defined by code that ran on a blockchain. That wasn't the definition I had when I began working in the blockchain and in the smart contract industry 7 or 8 years ago. My definition was always, it was a tamper-proof digital agreement that could definitively prove things about the real world. And that was my definition. And so that's the definition I've now been pursuing for those many years. I think that's also the definition of what this technology achieves in a very expansive, useful way, in addition to tokens, in addition to private key signatures, in addition to DAO-based governance and voting. And I genuinely believe that this hybrid smart contract definition, this hybrid smart contract format of packaging the highly reliable guarantees of a blockchain, is what 80 or 90% of the world's value is about, right? The world's agreements are not 90% about ownership, right? There may be 10% about ownership. The rest of them are about contractual outcomes related to global trade, contractual outcomes related to financial products, contractual outcomes related to gaming, ad networks, and the list goes on. And all of those contractual outcomes will fall under and be subsumed by the hybrid smart contract model. So when I talk about hybrid smart contracts, what I'm really talking about is the conception of a smart contract that I initially had, but that our industry has not yet delivered on, and the conception of a smart contract, which I believe a lot of people in our industry are here for, and that I know a lot of people in our community are very excited about. So if we take that conception of a smart contract as something that can be used for global trade, global financial markets, global insurance markets in this hybrid smart contract form, I think that's really the change in the world we're discussing. And if we discuss that change in the world, I think I see two very big and important dynamics that hybrid smart contracts will have a key role to play. And the degree to which we can make them usable for these dynamics is, in large part, in my opinion, the degree to which our industry will be relevant to the larger global kind of macro environment and society in general. And those two dynamics are really split between the developed markets and the emerging markets. So in the developed markets, I think there are already centralized digital agreements that function in a good enough way. And they function in a good enough way as far as giving people access to a certain amount of value of a centralized agreement. So for example, you can trade certain assets. You can have a bank account and send around digital dollars. You can have some kind of digital good in a video game. You can have these things and you can hold them and you can own them and you can control your assets in a trading account in some form. But it is not finished, right? The digital contract infrastructure of the world doesn't actually work the way people think it works. So people think that they have control over their assets when they're using Robinhood or they're using some kind of trading infrastructure. And they think that because they haven't dug into the details, they haven't reviewed the agreements they have with that brand, and they haven't experienced a failure. Really, that's why they think that. And then there's a exogenous set of market events, some of which is beyond their control, that basically shows them that even though they've been told that they have a certain relationship with their digital contracts, and even though they've been told there's transparency, and even though they've been told that markets are efficient and everyone has good information, the realization and the reality is that it doesn't work that way. They don't have control over their assets. The banking system can lock them out of their assets and reduce them to having to get only 66 euros per day from an ATM, like they did in Greece, like they did in other places in the world even now. In terms of the global financial system and the crisis that happened there in 2008, of which it seems like Bitcoin was born, that was an issue where people thought the system was transparent. People thought information was available to market participants. And it turned out that information was unbelievably unavailable. And that created this massive schism and this massive disconnection from reality because people thought that assets were worth something and they were worth something else, basically, except for a few select groups of people that benefited from that. What all of this does in the developed world is it creates these huge boom and bust cycles that basically leave the average person with the bill. So what basically happens in the global financial system right now, in the insurance industry, in a lot of the gaming industry, when the gaming industry has people playing tens of thousands of hours in games, and then they decide to shut the game down, and all the digital goods that people acquired in that game are suddenly worth nothing. There's people that have spent a lot of time mining or grinding all those digital goods, right? And what it comes down to is that these booms and busts are used against the smaller actors in a very disadvantaged way, basically. Because the more competent actors in the financial system, in the insurance system, even in the gaming universe, know about these things, the bigger companies that control all of this end up being okay because they know the rules of the game, and those rules are partly only known to them because they're not defined in a mathematical form. Now, I think the benefit of all of these systems for developed markets will be the proving of this in a highly reliable way. And that'll create transparency and that'll create control. And personally, I think that'll eliminate these boom and bust cycles to a certain degree. And even if the boom and bust cycles continue to some degree, people will have so much more transparency about their risks, and they will have so much more control over their assets that it will be difficult to leave the little guy, the average person, holding the bag and paying the bill. And at the end of the day, that's what I think developed markets will get from this. They will not go from 0 to 1. Developed markets already have a lot of these agreements, but they do not work the way people think. When they fail, the average person bears the cost. And that's because the transparency of the system isn't what people say it is. And it's because people don't have control of their assets and their participation in the system the way they think that they do. And as more people realize this, decentralized finance and blockchain-based hybrid smart contracts will become the standard for how people require people and institutions to make economic agreements with each other. And that's what I see happening over the next 5 to 10 years. In the emerging markets, what will happen, I think, will be even more significant than that, right? So beyond the elimination of massive boom and bust cycles due to lack of transparency, and beyond people not having control over their assets, in emerging markets, there are no digital contracts, right? So there are no contracts for you to have a bank account. There are no contracts for you to have insurance against drought for your farm, which is your entire livelihood. There are no contracts for you to engage in fair global trade, and there's all these middlemen that basically, take all the value away from you. All of these contracts don't exist, basically, because in a lot of parts of the world, the local legal system really, really sucks. It doesn't work, right? Basically, there's corruption. There's a local legal framework in a country that doesn't allow insurance companies to provide people insurance, that doesn't allow banks to provide bank accounts and be held accountable, that doesn't allow enforcement of global trade practices and fair trade practices and contractual practices that allow people to engage in global trade fairly. And I think, and I have a very strong kind of belief and also desire to see that completely change. And I really, really do think that just like the internet gave people in all of these parts of the world and a new access to education and information, where anybody with a $50 Android phone can now suddenly get a Stanford level education and see the same information and educational materials that I can find online. And just like that happened, really almost overnight, as fast as global internet access and, proliferation of mobile devices and access points to the internet happened, I think through that same internet infrastructure and through those same, $50 Android phone interfaces, people's economic lives in the emerging markets can be completely changed. They can be completely changed equally quickly, if not faster, because people can go from having no savings account to having a savings account that allows them to combat their local inflation because they can put value into a smart contract through an Android phone. People can go from having no insurance and a drought forcing them to close down their farm to having weather insurance at their fingertips through an Android phone. They can go to being able to offer their goods on a global market through global trade, through a smart contract that verifies certain things and guarantees them payment in a fair way. And I think it's easy for people in the developed markets to underestimate just how critical all of this legal infrastructure and all of this contractual infrastructure is, because we take it for granted. But I'm absolutely positive that when the rest of the world, which is actually by people, the majority of the world, gets access to a system of contracts that enables them to have all of these kind of abilities to economically collaborate with each other and with the global market and to manage risk and to save their money properly and to reduce risk from lack of rain or something like that, that is going to completely change their lives, possibly even more than access to information through the internet. And so I think that's the sense in which the world will become much more fair and much more transparent, and the sense in which what our industry does is actually about making the world work the right way, regardless of a legal framework and regardless of how some large asymmetrically positioned institution or hedge fund or insurance company wants the world to work. Because the way that they want the world to work is fine, as long as they can codify it in a mathematical contract, they can prove to us what they're going to do, they can guarantee us certain outcomes, then they should absolutely continue to exist. They should participate in this new ecosystem, and they should use their economies of scale to provide really great contractual outcomes to people. But I think the period of time where people can hide behind a vague brand and not provide any proof or guarantees to their users is going away. And I think it's even more exciting that the time when people in the emerging markets don't have a savings account, don't have insurance, don't have an ability to participate in global trade fairly, that's also going away. going away. And that's really what being in this industry and working on all this is about for me.
Fantastic stuff, Sergey. And so I love all that, and you've really kind of identified, the problems with, I guess, the legacy way of doing things, and what needs to happen to make a more fairer and more transparent world for all. And if we've identified that, blockchains and these new hybrid smart contracts have a very important role to play here. Well, let's take it back down from kind of the macro and back to the nitty gritty as we finish off. If this new fairer system can be based on, for example, DeFi protocols, how do we actually extrapolate that out so that the wider world, the mainstream, can really begin to participate? What does that mass adoption look like?
Yeah, I think DeFi is one of the first places where this is going to happen, because it's so related to people's economic life and it's so well polished. And it actually is riding on the coattails of the whole tokenization boom that has gotten a lot of value into the crypto format that DeFi is able to control, right? So what's amazing to me is that in the first half of this, not in the first half, in the first quarter of this year, the blockchain industry has arrived at $2 trillion in total value, right? The coin market cap kind of total value locked in the crypto format. I think that's amazing. I think in total over time it's going to be much higher, but I think what that speaks to is the amount of value that can be controlled by DeFi, right? Because the first step for DeFi is that the value that it controls needs to be in this tokenized blockchain native format. I think that $2 trillion total value locked in crypto assets is really a precursor and an initial sign of just how much value it's possible to put into these systems. Now, I think where we'll go from here is that those kind of crypto assets, stable coins, tokens are being polished as an on-ramp for the average person. And the average person, through PayPal, through any number of other services, is now gaining access to these kind of value holding containers in the form of these tokens, right? In the form of stable coins or whatever token they want to get, Bitcoin or Ether or whatever. And I think what'll happen is that these kind of rails, these onboarding rails to acquire these tokens, will continue to be polished by more and more big companies actually that have huge user bases, like Robinhood, like PayPal, like banks, like whoever. And those set of rails will enable people to participate in DeFi. And then eventually, what I really do think will happen is that the DeFi protocols being built today will be built so well, and they will be looked over by so many people in this open source kind of ethos and dynamic, and they will be so well verified that they will become the lending protocols, the derivatives protocols, the various protocols that existing web interfaces use, right? So existing banks with existing user bases, existing investment advisors, existing institutional asset managers, existing applications on your iPhone to hold value for you. And I think what's going to happen next is that you're going to see people getting into the crypto format in order to utilize DeFi. Right now, people get into the crypto format, they get into the tokenize my assets and put them in a Bitcoin or put them in a stable coin world because they see some kind of value in doing that. There's some kind of inherent value in just holding a Bitcoin or holding some kind of token. But I think what it's going to come down to is that the value of DeFi will be such an attractive force that people will be using the token dynamic and the crypto format dynamic as a way to basically use DeFi. And I think that that's going to be driven by two forces. The first force, which more and more people seem to be talking about now, is inflation. And unfortunately, that's a force that is continuing to be accelerated by global governments, central banks, Federal Reserve systems, and so on. And that's a force that's really not going anywhere. And then the second, and so people will seek yield. And if you look right now on Aave and other lending protocols, you'll see yield for stablecoins to the tune of 8%. Whereas if you look at bank accounts, you'll see below 1%. And that's just something that people haven't realized, and they don't have enough pressure on them from inflation to really care about. But once they really have that inflation going on and they really have that pressure to maintain the purchasing power of the assets they've worked their entire life to acquire, I think the place that's going to give them the best yield is where they're going to go. And that is, I think, going to be a large driving factor. The second large driving factor is going to be a number of failures in the global financial system and the assumptions that it makes about underlying value and that it makes about solvency and transparency of how a system works or how a system defines whether something is solvent. And this is something that I think is going to happen probably rapidly. I don't know if it'll happen gradually, might happen gradually. I'm not an expert in that, but I think it'll be really a matter of people learning week after week that their relationship with their assets or their relationship with an insurance provider or their relationship with a bank or their relationship with some kind of logo or brand is built on quicksand. And after a few of those brands don't deliver on their promises or aren't as solvent as people think or aren't as reliable as they've been led to believe, there will be a massive question of what is reliable. Where can I get reliability? Where can I get a transparent financial product? Where can I get a highly reliable system of contracts that guarantees me certain levels of risk and solvency and capital reserves around kind of my institution's holdings, my personal holdings? And I think the simple realization people will have, the same realization I had years ago, is that blockchains and hybrid smart contracts and decentralized finance is their only option. Up until decentralized finance, smart contracts, blockchains, the option people had was to go down the block to a different brand, which seemed like it had a better logo that would give them the same exact paper contract with the same exact basically bullshit story. And people had no choice. They would just be like, oh, your building looks really nice. You have wonderful pillars, right? This is why the banks in a lot of these mining towns and a lot of these places, they were the biggest, nicest looking building, right? They were better than the church, these banks. They had pillars. They were made of stone. They were amazing because they proved to people that, you're reliable. Here's my beautiful facade. I have enough money for marble. I have enough money for stone. It's a really reliable thing. This has been the agreement people have had for centuries with institutions and also with each other through institutions. And I think that there is every once in a while a reckoning about this. There's every once in a while a set of events that put that relationship into question. And so far, up until now, throughout history, there has been no alternative other than going down the street to the nicer bank with the bigger pillars and more stone and bigger bars on the windows and a nicer logo. But now you have an alternative. And I think that's the thing that is kind of amazing to me, because I don't understand why boom and bust cycles won't continue. By all accounts, every well-informed person in the financial world says boom and bust cycles will definitely continue. The boom and bust cycle is at an all-time high here, so the boom is really big. There's going to be some kind of bust. There's going to be some kind of return to reality. And invariably, when there is that return to reality, people always look for a better reality, right? They realize reality is really harsh. We all just took a 30% haircut. Some people got completely wiped out, and it's because we didn't know what was going on. It's because we couldn't manage risk. It's because they knew, but we didn't know. And amazingly enough, for the first time in history, there's going to be an alternative. And I personally think that when this boom and bust cycle happens, the alternative is going to be so attractive and so well made and so polished by that point that everyone is going to say, well, obviously, I want a cryptographic guarantee that you're solvent. And obviously, I want to know the exact mathematical conditions under which my assets will be, held in this state or that state, and under what conditions I can retrieve them, and that I control that. It's just a matter of people realizing that they need that from a bust cycle, creating that urgency and need. And I think that's probably going to be the large macro force that pushes the global financial system over the edge and completely into blockchain land, in my opinion.
Fascinating indeed, Sergey. Look, well, it will be fascinating, in fact, to watch how this all plays out, and particularly interesting to see what role Chainlink 2.0, these new hybrid smart contracts, and the role that these will play. Thank you very much to the team at Blockdown 4.0. Thanks to you, the audience, for watching. If you do want to learn all about Chainlink 2.0 and the new white paper, you can go to chain.link, of course. But yeah, hey, that's us for today. Sergey, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Andy. It was a pleasure chatting with you. Thank you.
All right, there you go. Fantastic chat with Sergey. Always so good to talk to Sergey, and just amazing to see what him and the Chainlink team are continuing to build, and really exciting to learn more about this next step, next evolution in terms of hybrid smart contracts and decentralized Oracle networks. I do hope you did enjoy that. Thanks for listening. As always, please do subscribe to the Crypto Conversation podcast in whatever podcast app you are using. Give us a nice rating in Apple iTunes. And yeah, this was us. We're out of here. Thanks again. This was the Crypto Conversation for Brave New Coin.